Hey, everybody. Everybody's here. Yves LaRose, what's going on, man?
Kevin Wilcox, going good yourself? I'm pretty excited about this. I've been waiting for this particular week for a while now.
You like Dan's proposal, huh?
Well, I like to talk about it. I want to know why people love it so much, and I really want to break it down to see what are the values and kind of what we're trying to get out of that. And I haven't really seen a thorough review yet, so I'm hoping that people show up and we get to actually do this week.
Yeah, let's see what happens. I know we got some Katie Roman. Thank you for joining us. Let's go, of course, and Anna. It's good to see you again. We'll just give it another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and start. Do the usual first 10 minutes. Talk about the how to name yourselves and set up for the breakout rooms. We might have just 2 breakout rooms here. Hey Isaac, how we doing? Good to meet you in person. I think finally.
Good. Yeah, it's good to be here. I'm just interested to hear the conversation.
Sure. And we got Paco, regular, every week. Thank you, Paco. Tanish, recognize your name from chat. It's good to meet you, too. Let's go ahead and start showing the slides. You see in the Alliance chat, you can take a look and pull up the slides yourself if you'd like. So let's see here. All right, so week 5. So this week, of course, the goals are going to be comparing Daniel Larimer's his proposal of the Constitution, his intent of code as law, version 2, rather. And we're looking to find the common articles, wording, and kind of intent between the version 2 proposal and the current Constitution. Find what's similar, what's different, and what's most important to us, and discuss that as needed. And then, of course, we encourage everybody to start your own calls. Really, if you want to discuss something more in depth, or if you have some particular interest, you've seen with EOS Ignite do this a lot nowadays, and so feel free to start your own calls if you wish. Of course, we'll try to help you spread the word about those if you'd like. So everybody will need 2 links. We need Dan's intent of code as law proposal, and also the current Constitution pulled up as well, so you can kind of figure out which articles go along with each other. And also the facilitators for the 2 groups can kind of share their screens and show the articles as well as they go. So we'll post these in chat in just a moment here. We'll put them up for you guys, or someone else can put them up if you see them. And let's see. So changing your name, really, it's pretty easy with this call because we're just an English only call. But if you want to be a facilitator, if you want to lead the group in discussion, go ahead and rename yourself with an F in front. And that way we can, put a facilitator in each group. And when you get into your groups, we'll talk about this in just a moment, but the facilitator is just guiding the discussion. They're not the leader of the group. There will be someone nominated at the beginning of the discussion or at the end to be the spokesperson for the group and kind of represent what the group said, discussed, and decided on. And then when we come back together, that way we can compare and contrast what the groups came up with. So the sequence of events, this is the primary slide. We go to the breakout rooms here shortly. And as I just said, the spokesperson / recorder of the meeting notes will be different from the facilitator, ideally. And for 3 to 4 minutes, just silently read the article from Daniel Larimer. Read the actual intent of code as law proposal. So you have to scroll down a little ways. It's about halfway down where he actually starts his proposed Constitution. And then go ahead and read. So we'll go ahead and do group 1 can start with article number 1 in his proposed Constitution. And then group 2 can start with article number 2. And if you guys have extra time, you can move on to the next 1 or 2 articles beyond that. But the primary points you'll be trying to find when you're discussing his articles is there a corresponding article with his proposal and with the current version of the Constitution? What is the corresponding article in version 1? And go ahead and pull that up and look at the 2 and compare them. And what is being compared, changed, or challenged by Dan? What needs to be changed? And then, of course, if you have more time, keep on going. So that's the basic rundown of what we'll be doing. We'll go ahead and start the breakout rooms. Looks like we have 13 people here. We may do 3 rooms just because we may get a couple more people come in. All right, so we got Dachian wants to be a facilitator. We'll put him in there. I see Lightning is there as well. Hey, Lightning, good to see you. And anyone else that wants to be a facilitator? I see only one facilitator, and that is Dachian. I think we...
I have a question, Kevin. Are you able to give me permission so I can record? Martin has been doing the summaries for the other videos, and he's going to be doing the summary for this one as well.
Absolutely, Eve. Here, let me give you... it doesn't allow us to just give everybody recording privileges right off the bat. I don't know why, but...
we'll see if
always,
it...
always just ask. I will. Yeah, I'm still trying to find you. Yeah, I'll give it to you in just a moment here. Once you get into your breakout room, I can do it.
Cheers, thank you.
Okay. All right, so group one, we're going to have Anna, and we'll have Isaac, Katie Roman, and we'll have Myra in there as well. Group two, let's see, we're going to move, and I'm going to put Myra up to group one. Group two, we have Paco and Lightning and Eve LaRose. And also, I think we'll have Tanish in there as well, just to help keep things. So group one, again, is Anna, Myra, Isaac, and Katie. Group two is going to be Paco, Eve LaRose, Lightning, and Tanish. And then group three is going to be June. Phone number 415-516-4444. I'm not sure who that is exactly. And Chen and Philip from EOS Detroit. And I'll kind of float in and out just to see how you guys are doing and help where needed. And I can provide an opinion if you guys really care about mine. So, all right. I'll go ahead and send you guys over there to your rooms right now. I'll see it pop up on your screen.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Good, good. And how do you pronounce your name?
Yeah, it's go by Da Qian. I think Qian
Da
is China. Yeah, that's easier.
Wait, Da Qian?
Da Qian, yeah.
Da Qian. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have
Kevin from New York. So, okay. I think I will be your facilitator today. I'm also the translator for number three, for core number three this week. So I just want to kind of dive in and see how today's meeting goes, so I can better prepare for core number three. But let's dive into this week's call. And should I share a screen or something like that?
Is it just the three of us? Oh, hey, Philip.
Hello.
You have Rob Rico's as your avatar. Nice. And who is the who's 415, 516, et cetera, et cetera? Okay. Well, you may listen then.
So hello, everybody. So can you all see my shared screen?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So again, my name is Da Qian, and today I will be the facilitator here. So I think, first of all, we should select who wants to be our spokesman and recorder today. If you could volunteer, that'd be great.
That should be easy. Kevin from EOS New York.
I'm happy to be of service.
Great. Is anybody want to do a recording? Just taking some brief notes here.
I will Let me pull up a doc. Yeah, I can record.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. So I think first of all, we would like to just read about each constitution version and start to compare. Let's see. Shall we start from Dan Larimer's version here, or do you guys prefer starting with the version 1?
We could probably start with version 2 and then look back to see if there's any reference to that from the original Constitution. So
great. So can you all see Dan Larimer's proposal here on my screen?
Is it on his Medium account or was it on Block One?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Was it on his personal Medium account or was it on EOS.io?
I think earlier Kevin Wilcox just shared a link.
Okay,
and can you also see on my shared screen here?
Yes, I have it now.
is this the Medium article? I did see something from Block One as well. I don't know if it's different. It might be slightly different. There's a Block One version of this.
Oh, really?
Is that a reference document or is it Bytemaster blog?
I'm not sure about that. I think I just clicked on the link that they provided and it came up with this one. That's the one that I've been studying. So I don't know if I have no knowledge about if there exists an alternative one that's coming from Block One.
Okay. Why don't has everybody read in the last 48 hours the intent of code as law constitution proposed by Dan Larimer?
Yes.
Philip, June. Okay. Then by all means, you can begin the discussion as I quietly scan it.
Great.
What are your thoughts, Philip, on from a general standpoint? How do you feel the Dan Larimer's constitutional version would work in application? Can you describe from your perspective the difference between layer 1 and layer 2 governance? So for the idea of layered governance to me is a difference between to give like a terrestrial relative point is federal law versus contract law. So there's the law of the land and there's the law between you and I. So layer 1 is the law of the EOS platform. Layer 2 is the law that you and I decide that we are subject to as we are parties to an agreement between one another. As far as which one trumps the other, in most cases, I think it should be the contract is the prevailing law, so long as it does not egregiously violates some system level rule. That's what I see layer 1 and layer 2 as. Does anybody else feel differently, or?
Yeah, can I know I'm the facilitator today, but can I also express my opinion here? Yeah. So to me, I think from my personal perspective, I think what Dan Larimer is trying to do here is try to simplify things compared to version 1, because I think what he was doing here was trying to say that everything that we can solve, every problem or every dispute here, if we can solve them using the code, using technology, then let's just do that using the code and using technology that EOS.io is built ground up with to solve all the disputes within the code. And if anything that happens outside of this intent of code, intent of code is law territory, then we will need to establish a more concrete process of establishing the ECAF or arbitration process to solve this problem. So that's just my kind of high-level summary of.
Would you, to define simplify, would you say that the alternative definition of simplify in this application is to limit the scope of the Constitution only to what is possible to enforce? To me, that's what simplify means. It means we're not going to talk about things that we cannot enforce with code or consensus.
I think I don't necessarily mean by the things that cannot be enforced by code. What I was saying, I guess, was largely that well, maybe I don't know. Maybe I agree with you at the moment.
Maybe I was so not necessarily enforced by code, but enforceable is what I mean.
That's what I thought. Yes.
Okay.
I'll just chime in here real quick, just maybe to discuss. I mean, the first clause or article seems to be I guess it's the second one in this one, but it's essentially the same one as the one in block 1. But so it's essentially shifting the responsibility of dispute resolution, or at least some version of dispute resolution, to block producers instead of arbitrators in this article. So it seems to me, there'd be no reason for any arbitration layer if we use this system, but block producers would have to take on that role. And so I think it's just interesting. I mean, do block producers want that responsibility?
Can you say that again? They have to take on the role of what? I'm trying to think and record at the same time. It's hard.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we should have had someone else. But yeah, essentially this to me says that, block producers will be essentially responsible for some level of arbitration. And in the previous Constitution, it was a third-party body like ECAF. So I think that's the biggest distinction, that this version says, okay, ultimately, block producers really ultimately have the power anyways, but they'll also be the ultimate arbitrator based on the 2/3+1 rule and their interpretation of regarding contracts. And I think that shift in responsibility, I'm wondering if block producers really feel like they want to take on that role. The second thing is, if it's, he wants to prevent like freezes and delays on the blockchain. So that's the next article. Elected block producers aren't supposed to freeze or modify any contracts as long as it's doing something that's not intentional or not written in the Ricardians. So to me, those are the big kind of high level points. He doesn't want the blockchain to be slowed down by third party arbitration forum making decisions and freezing accounts and this. So essentially block producers now have this responsibility, which may be inefficient as well, but at least there's another article that says, hey, at least don't freeze accounts or don't do anything. Just do nothing until you really, really have to, if it's like an obvious,
I want to touch on a couple of points that you said, and I think that they were good. One is that Dan helped write the original Constitution, and the arbitration clause contained within the original Constitution was changed to the ICC and then back from ECAF to the ICC and then back to ECAF. And I can't remember why. Thomas Cox knows why, whatever. But my point is that at one point, Dan believed that an arbitration clause in the Constitution to cover all members, and by members I mean token holders or stakeholders or whatever, of the network was a good idea. This document that he released was in response to PR crises that were brought on about by issues with ECAF and questionable controversial actions by block producers, indictment of sovereignty of account, blockchain, all these things compounded together, and he came out with this document to try to quell the amount of bullshit that was being thrown around. But and I just wanted to put that out there. But to me, one of the really important points that you just said, June, is that in this Constitution, it's explicit that the role of adjudicator of intent, the role of the interpreter of intent, falls on the block producer. The block producer must determine the intent of whatever transaction through review of the code regarding contract, user interface, and real behavior of the user. That is, as a block producer, I am biased because that is a burden that absolutely no block producer is either prepared, qualified, or funded to do. Maybe the ones that are literally lawyers right now.
Yeah, no, that's the interesting thing right there. So that it seems as though it is a huge responsibility, and and I think he just thought, for practical purposes, it's still better than ECAF, and I think his hope was that that there won't be as many cases, especially if you're not able to freeze or modify any of these contracts. Things will, at least it'll be just very extreme situations where something might happen. And so I guess the default is do nothing, really. That's the default. And I think the idea that everybody as block producers had to come together will at least limit or narrow the scope of arbitration so that it has to almost be obvious is my thinking of reason, because otherwise I think it'll be very inefficient, maybe not as efficient as a third-party arbitration forum. I think that might even be slightly more inefficient, but regardless, it'll be inefficient on either side because it's a huge responsibility.
Well, one thing that he writes, and whether or not this was intentional, I don't know, but he uses the word arbiter, not arbitrator. An arbiter is a judge, and an arbitrator is one who oversees arbitration and rules on arbitration, the dispute resolution process. An arbiter is just someone who has ultimate authority on a matter. So that's whether or not he did that on purpose, I don't know. But the actual word arbitrator, I guess, yeah, he does use it earlier in his Medium post. Maybe he just accidentally did it interchangeably. But anyway, whether or not he meant to is unclear, because in the Constitution that he actually writes of Article 1 through 10, he uses the word arbiter. Maybe a small detail.
That's a good point, and I think the arbiter, I think in that case would be specifically if there is a mutual contract between, let's say, a DApp layer agreement, and so you know the you know counterparties of a contract could select a different arbiter. So, but I think for default cases without you know, anyone indicating who the arbitrator is, then it would fall on the block producers. So either of those two. But then the block producers will still have to identify who the selected arbiter of a contract is. So they'll still have to do some work.
Not only that, but the arbiter's opinion on the matter doesn't seem like it's anything other than here is my interpretation of the circumstances at hand. You may or may not use this to help inform your decision. Talking to the block producers, because in Article 2 it says by a supermajority of elected block or an arbiter mutually agreed to by the parties to the dispute and not or and enacted by producers. So whether or not that arbiter is in some way empowered by producers, or the effect of the arbiter's ruling is enacted or enforced or executed by producers, it does not seem clear. It's ambiguous.
Okay, yeah, that's a good. That probably needs some clarification there. And it's almost as block producers, it says super majority, so you have to kind of get together with everybody else. It's so I guess there is some.
It gets the whole process seems ridiculous, because you have 15 global tech companies that have to review the facts of your case and rule on it. You have to you potentially, without a central forum to present your case, you would have to present it 15 times, possible 20, possibly 21 times, because you don't know who is going to support you and who's going to go against it. A block producer's time is going to be spent entirely reviewing these cases.
So sorry, may I just trim in? So by cases, Kevin, what you mean by cases are those disputes, and what you mean by disputes are those like fraud or key theft, those cases or disputes, or
somebody saying that whatever happened is not the way it was supposed to happen, or
okay,
it wasn't supposed to happen in the first place.
So that is within the intent of codice law, that scope.
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in real quick. I think I think that can provide some efficiencies, but you're ultimately relying on a third party. And I think if you're the final, if you enact these the resolution, if you're responsible for it, you almost there's there's that as well. I mean, you have a responsibility, and whenever you outsource to a third party, you kind of give up that responsibility, and that's not always a good thing if things go wrong. So, anyways, that's kind of what I'll say. So.
See, the problem with that is that it takes the person who's actually deciding on the matter is out of the hands of the actual parties to the dispute. So the people that care most about just resolving the dispute efficiently are those who are actually in the dispute. That's and we want, I think, as a design, we want to make sure that the actual power to resolve it is within the hands of those people and not other people. So by having it be a third party that's voted on by block producers, you're at the whims of the block producers. Well, you could say, well, no, I'm not, because I can vote for the block producers, but there's not an immediate like cause and effect there. You can cast a vote and the block producer could still be there, and then you have to use their third party auditors. But you know, why not just say, you guys go pick whoever has control over your dispute to resolve it, and when they've issued a ruling on it, come back with it. A DAP would have an arbitration clause in their terms of service that you would accept or deny at the point where you would start interacting with it. And if you so choose to accept it, you would accept the arbitration clause. If you deny it, you are denied service from the DAP. In my opinion, when it comes to dispute resolution, the actual framework should be outlined in layer 1, and then the execution or specific terms should be outlined in layer 2, or the contract layer. So the Constitution empowers a specific dispute resolution process, and then the contract outlines the specific terms of execution for that process. Meaning, we have arbitration as a concept, or we have mediation as a concept that is recognized by the blockchain and included in base Constitution. The actual rules for dispute resolution under which you were to resolve a dispute is handled at the contract layer. So I, as a DApp, you as a user, we understand that arbitration is recognized on the EOS blockchain. My DApp is a decentralized YouTube, and you want to upload your content, be a content producer. Well, I use the American Arbitration Association in case you and I have any disputes, period. If you don't feel like doing that, you can go find another decentralized YouTube. Or rather, if there are any disputes between content producers, or whatever have, and if there is nothing defined, then there is no means to resolve a dispute.
Yeah, I think that is a very efficient way to keep it on the DApp layer, and I think maybe this was trying to accommodate that in some ways as well, where people are selecting their own arbitration forms rather than ECAF or anything else.
The problem is that it doesn't give any power to the actual parties to the dispute or the arbiter of the dispute to resolve it. It has to be then ultimately resolved by producers who have to exercise judgment over the intent of whatever code, Ricardian user interface, and actual use.
Yeah, it seems as though I'll throw something out there. What if this was not even there? So it said, you know, block producers are not even, you know, are won't do anything essentially. So so version 1 has ECAF. They're kind of default. They'll do this. And this one says, okay, BPs will have to take that role. But what if nobody does it? I mean, we just have this blockchain operating. Your solution seemed to suggest that, hey, if, you know, we're kind of relying on the DApp layer anyways, how would that work for the ultimate resolution of, you know, let's say the recording contract is doing something that's not intended. Someone wants to start a dispute there, and there is no, let's say there is no recording contract at that point. There's, you know, someone using a platform and expects something, I guess, from and maybe even the DApp doesn't even have a recording contract on their side. So someone uses it, someone wants to dispute that they've lost their funds because the code went out of whack. So how do you resolve that situation, I guess? Can
I say one thing on that?
Okay.
I really liked Kevin's idea all in, and wouldn't a DApp that doesn't have a recording contract within its, you know, usability, or an arbitrator chosen in case there needs to be one, wouldn't they be going against the Constitution, the layer 1, and therefore shouldn't be a DApp anyway? That's all I got.
Okay. So that's one answer, Justin. Yeah, that may make sense. I think version 1 would argue that, you know, and I think Ian would argue that, and those really promoting ECAF would say that, hey, there should be an arbitration layer for those cases where there is no recording contract, there is no the users aren't understanding that, and will, you know, create dispute or would create a case. So that's, I think, the intent. But if it's just at the DApp layer, and if you don't have a recordian, or if you're not signing anything, and you're then that's that. I mean, it's like you're on your own.
The issue is if we try to create, we're trying to create rules for like systemic prosecution by block producers of those who are non-compliant. And the one thing that I like about the current Constitution, there are a lot of things that I don't like, but the one thing that I like is that the block producers can't really do anything, but they have all the power to do it. So that the thing that we need to make sure is that, and this is what checks and balances are for, right? Is that we have one side over here that has authority but no power, and then we have this other side over here that has all the power but no authority, and they have to check each other in order for either of them to do anything. And then you have, in the case of EOS, you have a third person over here, which is the token holder. And for the block producers, they're voted by the token holders. That's their check, right? For ECAF, what's their check? It's supposed to be that the actual adjudicators, the arbitrators, are also voted on. Currently, that's not the case, but maybe it will be in the future. Another version of that is to hold the arbitration association accountable, is if the token holder elects them essentially by choosing them in the arbitration clause of whatever kind of agreement that they have prior to a dispute ever occurring. So that's just them exercising like free market choice. I'm going to use you and keep you in business in case anything were to go wrong. If I don't use you, it's because you suck and I'm going to find somebody else. But we don't want to create what you said before was, should they be a DApp at all? Right? There are things like in the current Constitution that if a DApp must be open source. Okay, well, EOS Bet isn't, right? They're the most popular DApp by transaction volume on chain. No one's done a thing about it. And I know this for a fact, and I'm a block producer, and I'm not going to do anything about it. And the reason why I'm not going to do anything about it is because I don't want to be exercising judgment on the, whether or not you're allowed to be here, because I have all the power to do that. I want somebody to tell it to me. I want somebody with the authority to do it, because then somebody that's a total asshole can't come in and be, this omnipotent, malevolent ruler. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point too. The example with the EOS bet, and so there's a couple things there. Do you think that we should, as a ecosystem, be able to say that EOS bet should or should not be on the system? And number two, I guess it's whether or not a third party should kind of be the check and balance for block producers to make that decision. So the first thing is, should we say yes or no for any of these dApps to be on, regardless of whatever situation? And then the second thing is, well, okay, then what's the process in doing so? Yeah, and I feel I'm more of an old school crypto guy. I would say, hey, if people are gonna use their dApp, I mean, people have to really take the responsibility and really know what they're dealing with. And I don't know if we should, decide for anybody what to use. So anyways, that would be my thought. But I think others might feel scared if there's dApps that are not open source or causing problems or potentially causing problems, that they would want some intervention into the dApp. So anyways, so those are a couple of points. So.
Well, the only thing that we've been able to see ECAF accomplish so far is prevention of theft, not the reversal of theft. For instances where theft has already occurred, that property's gone. And we've seen no indication that we are able to successfully retrieve it under any circumstances, except by personal appeal to the exchange that's been identified to receive that stolen property by the person who has been stolen from. So they've done it themselves. Really, when we're talking about an arbitration clause that covers every single member of the network, we're talking about covering carelessness with keys and theft.
Okay, I've got one more thing. To go back to Kevin's again, put the layer 1 says, arbitration exists inside of EOS. But, the whole ecosystem knows they prefer to exist at the contract level, like you suggest. But we use something like Referendum that EOS Canada is working on, so that we can have Referendum to vote for the one arbitrator in case the dApp doesn't have one.
That's another method, relying on Referendum, and that can resolve a lot. I'm not sure about choosing arbitration that way. It might be a little bit, it may not be as efficient, but for large major issues, I think we could rely on Referendum, like big DAO hacks type situations. I think Referendum is great for that. So yeah, maybe relying on Referendum is another big just alternative process, which is great because that there is some authority there that comes from the token holders and not a third party that's right now not elected.
So the problem here with dealing with a malevolent dApp is blame is on everybody. In my opinion, per Article 4, all parties are responsible for auditing the code and the recording contract before use. Furthermore, a recording contract is not defined, and there's no components that are required. But despite it being capitalized, it's meaningless in this document. So Article 7, a Ricardian contract is deemed accepted when a transaction is incorporated in the blockchain. So how would I write an Ricardian contract that just has like an emoticon dick and you signed it and that's my dApp? Great, I have a Ricardian. I'm compliant. There's no components of the actual Ricardian that's written anywhere. It doesn't. There's there's no clear definition of what compliance with this document would actually mean in application, nor is there a reliable, scalable way to enforce compliance where it is absent, because it would require 2/3 plus 1 voting to determine that on a one-on-one basis by block producers. It just seems ridiculous.
All right, guys. I think we had a very good summary here, and pretty much I think we discussed a lot, and think we're about to go back to the main house.
So it was hard for me to write and think.
Sorry. Did you not taking notes?
No, I was.
we talked a lot.
So I think one of the main points was that it relies on block producers to interpret intent,
right,
as well as execute any kind of enforcement based on that interpretation. And that's a concentration of power that we may not be comfortable with. That's what I'm going to say. Is everyone cool?
I'm cool with that. Thanks a lot, Kevin.
All right, everybody. Welcome back. Thank you for coming. I hope you guys all had a good time. So let's jump right into it. We have group one. Facilitator, I believe, was I guess Anna, you were not the spokesperson was Isaac, I believe, for group one. You may need to unmute yourself there, Isaac.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about 2 articles. The first thing we talked about was violence, and that was a really interesting conversation, because we were talking about how violence is one of those things that that sort of bridges the 2 worlds, like the digital world and the real world, and so it ended up being this larger conversation, like how can anything that takes place in the world of EOS transfer into the real world, and also what determines violence. Like, what if someone does violence and then they get the death penalty? Maybe that is a form of violence enacted on them by the state, right? EOS is for transactions. It's a digital realm where we interact with repertory or criminal law, but criminal law is different all over the world. So in order to work out the problems of that article, you'd sort of have to come up with a global interpretation of law or something like that. As EOS evolves, people can interpret principles as implicit. So if there is a principle in EOS of respecting each other, violence is obviously implicit in that. No violence, like not having violence, is unenforceable. It's just because it's impossible to fully bridge that. But there could be it could be stipulated in Ricardian contracts. That's what someone said. Like if you were interacting with the blockchain and you sign a contract with another entity, maybe no violence could be part of that individual contract. The other thing to watch out for is this factor called crowd juries and digital mob justice. It's something that small communities deal with, where someone on trial is too well known by the community, so the community forms their own opinion, and then the person doesn't get a fair trial. They're biased because everyone knows what they do in the community. And so essentially, it's kind of difficult for everything to be public, especially in the cases of a criminal proceeding. Like if everyone knows everything during a criminal proceeding, it'll throw the criminal proceeding off. And you see this all the time where there's closed hearings, the information is not revealed to the public. And that's sort of at odds with blockchain technology, because the nature of blockchain is for it to be transparent and publicly referential. So the conclusion was that we can't guard against violence, but we can guard against breaking the code, and not doing violence could be part of the code, could be part of a Ricardian contract. If you've entered into agreement via Ricardian contract, then the intervention would be to preserve the code and to preserve fulfilling your part in the contract. So maybe not dealing with that in the comparison of the two, of Dan's new version, not dealing with that was to take power from the base layer and transfer it to the rest of the system. That was pretty abstract. I forget who said that, but I liked it. I wrote it down. The next article, let's see. So the next article was about protection from protection for people writing the code, that the intent of the code was always sacrosanct, and if there was an error or mistake in the code, the actions that you can do on the EOS network itself, or does it apply to the app developer layer where you're coding things with a certain intent and stuff goes differently than you intend, or does it apply even to the user layer? Because the article says that that everyone engaged in the code needs to be responsible for reviewing the code, and I thought that was pretty unlikely for a user to be playing a game on their phone or something and then review the code before they play it. So there were a number of good ideas, and one of them was Linux is open source. There's open source models that, like the Linux system is open source. How do they handle all the contributions and all the applications that are built on Linux? Like, what's the legal terminology? Like, how does Linux speak to their developers? So we thought that was an interesting path to pursue. And we just thought, we thought that basically the two texts that we were comparing were just too short. Like, they didn't specify what was a bug in the code, which code in the central core of EOS or in the application itself, who was part of the Ricardian contract, is the end user part of that contract. So we had a lot of questions that we thought could be articulated in sub-articles. And that was basically it. We just got through those two things.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
We'll jump over to group number 2. I think Paco facilitated for that one. You might be on mute there, Paco.
Sorry about that. We stayed on Article 2, and there was a pretty good talk about it. And the spokesperson is going to be Tanish, and the notes were taken by Eve. So I guess Tanish can...
Tanish, you may also be on mute there, Tanish. There you go.
Is he there? Yeah.
Hey. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to be the spokesperson, but yes. So we talked about Article 2 of Daniel Larimer version 2, and it was the majority of questions were how would it be scalable, and are BPs expected to be vigilant, and how could it help to preserve many disputes. So the main ideas discussed was of bonds, that the application themselves could raise a bond, a truth bond mentioning of like they need to be audited by third parties themselves, which needs to take into account the licenses as well. So I don't know if I was able to summarize that well, but if you Eves want to step up and then summarize it.
Sure. I just posted the notes as well for whoever wants to actually follow along with the notes. We had some really good back and forth discussion. There's 2 lines in the article itself that were being questioned in terms of please elaborate and please discuss what the intent of these particular lines, because the article itself is fairly long. The first line was a super majority may, at their discretion, and the super majority referring to the block producers, 15 plus 2/3 plus 1, may at their discretion freeze a contract during an active dispute until such time as code to fix the contract is available. And the second line was Ricardian contractual terms that cannot be enforced by properly functioning code are beyond the scope of the producer's authority to evaluate and enforce. The questions that stem from those 2 particular lines in the article in general were, how is Article 2 beneficial to the community, and how is it beneficial to small businesses? The answers were that most likely this particular article will help prevent multiple disputes, and that it would shift the disputes that are being claimed and or being heard to disputes of intent of code. There was no real mention on how that would happen, but these would be potential benefits. One of the questions that stemmed as well is if the block producers are responsible for auditing the code and or determining whether or not to run the code, could the block producers be held liable if they do indeed run the code? And so part of this idea was when an application and a user get into a contract together, they could, in the smart contract, assign an arbitrator and also potentially post a bond. The block producers would, when they receive the lines of code for this particular application, would see within the Ricardian contract or within the smart contract whether or not, let's say, a bond was posted, or if there were some kind of credentials by a third-party security audit company that can be present in there, and they would determine whether or not voluntarily if they choose to run the code. If they choose to run the code, it seemed to be that yes, they would be held liable should something go awry. So the block producers themselves could also voluntarily post a bond of good faith. And if they chose not to run the code, then they would be held liable to the community in terms of whether the community decided and determined, do they want to have block producers that are not comfortable in running code? So there was this big topic of will block producers and can block producers be third-party security audit providers at the same time sometime in the future?
Only if they specify that they need to be liable, only if they specify that in the bond itself, right? They would stand liable only if they have specified the clause in the bond which block producers have raised.
So there were a lot of questions on that and how that would work. So I don't think we came to a conclusion, but yes, Tanish is right. There's how this would happen was where how this particular article, if it were to be implemented, what would be the real life scenarios? How tangibly would this happen is where we spent a lot of the time discussing. It was mentioned that potentially there would be the use of bonds and third-party websites that would be giving somewhat stamp of approvals on particular code, and that the block producers and the community as a whole would come together to educate and encourage users to only use applications that have, that are present on these websites or that are trusted. It was mentioned that perhaps this is not scalable and it's not feasible. It was mentioned that, am I missing something else? Yeah, I think that captures everything. Sorry, I was responsible.
There was one other question, which is once a block producer does post a bond, is it possible? Is it a reasonable attack vector to be concerned about that a malicious person might write some code that looks okay, and then set up a convenient victim to fall afoul of that code, and then claim victimhood, and then go after the bond?
So the auditing company would stand liable for that.
Thomas, are you able to write that question in a document just so I capture
it? Yeah, I think Tanish had a response, and I didn't hear it, so we should both write into the document, definitely.
The question was?
I'll stick it in the bond at Tanish, and if you don't see it, I'll PM you the link.
All right. Let's go over it. We'll jump over to group 3. Thanks, guys. Group 2, sounds like you had the biggest article, certainly the most words to work through. Certainly a loaded article as well. So thank you for working through that one. Group 3, I think it was led by Dacian. Is that right?
Yep. So in group 3, we also talk a lot about Article 2 actually. So we focus a lot on many aspects of this constitution, and Kevin is our spokesman. Kevin?
You're on mute there, Kev.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Hi, everybody. We jumped around a lot as well. So one of the things that we discussed is that, and this is obvious to everybody, is that we're in a decentralized community we're in a decentralized system. There's no one in charge here. The lack of a central authority makes any kind of institutionalized prosecution of noncompliance difficult to enforce, scale, etc. So I think that's just an ongoing concern. Consensus moves slowly. Consensus is not synonymous with efficiency. Centralization is, and that's not what we are. So I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind. In Dan's Constitution, he mentions a number of times Ricardian contracts, and so does the original Constitution. But for as much as we talk about them, we haven't heard any type of rules, standards, boilerplate components, or any way or method to evaluate whether or not Ricardian effectively condenses the intent of code at all. So for us to assume, we've walked along with the assumption that Ricardians are doing an adequate job of conveying the intent of code, but we've actually never put that to the test by evaluating the intent of any code by use of its Ricardian. So as much as Dan is trying to simplify things, the continued use of Ricardians as this beacon of declaration of intent is probably more ambiguous in application than we would like it to be. Specifically in Article 2, Dan uses the word arbiter, not arbitrator. And arbitrator is the specific administrator of, or the overseer of the process of arbitration. An arbiter is just an ultimate judge. And the troublesome language that he uses is that if there is a dispute, it's in the first sentence. If there's a dispute on intent phase, is very ambiguous. Is it enacted as in enforced, or is the arbiter is the arbiter in some way empowered by code or other means to enforce the intent themselves? So that's a little ambiguous. In Article 3, he uses the words contracts, not accounts. Now, I feel like that's important, that because if we take a step back and think how this was written, it's important to remember that both Constitution version 1 and Constitution version 2 were both written under like a time of duress, in my opinion. In Constitution 1, it was like we were nearing launch. In Constitution 2 with Dan, he's responding to bad PR. So the context in which these are written, I think, is meaningful. So it's odd that he specifically uses the word contracts when we were talking about the freezing of accounts at the time. So I don't know if he meant that to be synonymous or not. But overall, the thing that we kept touching back on that seems to be very problematic with version 2 of the Constitution is that the ultimate judge of intent in this proposed system is the BP. So we end up finding that there is a tendency to consolidate power and authority into the group of block producers, which could be by design, because if I'm trying to infer Dan's intent, the block producer at this point in time is the only group that is elected and accountable. Now, I understand that ECAF arbitrators are going to be elected in the future. Right now, that they are not. And if we remember the context in which this was written, which is in essentially response to bad PR and escalating pressure, he may have written it in response to that exact moment, which was ECAF is not accountable. So he chose then to consolidate that power and authority in block producers because they are. So when you dive deep down into it, the version 2 seems to have a lot of issues. It doesn't seem to really outline anything except that block producers can do whatever they want.
That's an interesting summary. Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. And I'd like to give a quick shout out too in the YouTube stream from Detroit. We have Stephen Turner, who has been posting a lot of comments and a lot of good comments. And we're hoping, Stephen, next time come on one of these calls, give us your thoughts. It looks like you have pretty good opinions, from what I can tell. Pretty detailed opinions. So we're going to wrap this up, guys. We promised 60 to 70 minutes, just 2 more items to discuss and point out, and then we'll be all done. I'll show my screen here. Community leaders, and again, give a shout out to June with EOS Ignite if you'd like to create your own study group or your own. And here's the thing, as we get closer to the end of this Constitution referendum series, as these weeks continue, you may find yourself becoming more motivated to write a candidate constitution or form a small group, or maybe you want to propose a certain article. You're always welcome to start those discussion groups or begin your own group to start drafting that. So feel free to make that choice, and we will help you advertise as you deem fit. And we also offer an advanced facilitated training as well for folks who want to facilitate their own calls or within these calls themselves. And then if you guys could take 45 seconds, please, and in this Zoom chat, give us one thing to make this process better next time. We're always looking for recommendations, feedback. What is one thing that we could do next time that would be better to make this whole thing run more smoothly? Go ahead and just type it in the chat, please. More time, says Yves LaRose. All right. Enable the groups to discuss their finance together somehow. That's a good, it'd be fun to get some back and forth. In terms of time, how long would you guys be looking for? We talking 90 minutes or, yeah, Yves, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if we, I echo the sentiment that Kevin wrote. If we were to add a portion where afterwards we can talk all three groups together, another half hour.
So we do the first 60 minutes almost exactly like we did, and then the last 30 minutes.
Something like that. I mean, just to try it out.
You know what? I imagine that if we had the groups discussing, right, that may just be what you just said. I was thinking. I'm sorry. That's the second part. Like everyone could, like, if you want to stay for now, group chat, you can stay. Otherwise.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
Okay. Sorry.
And then, I mean, we do typically do that. We do stay on the call if ever we want to, but this could be part of the formal process.
I like it. That sounds great. We'll put that in there. We'll see if we can fit it in next week. And Thomas wants everyone to require participants to prove they've read the material first. That's part of why we ask everybody to read them during the call, so that we don't have people showing up and pretending they read the material, which is a common thing. That is actually something that Amazon requires everybody to read the meeting notes in the meeting itself, so nobody is pretending. And also, if you guys could type in one thing you really enjoyed about this experience, we'll give you 30 seconds. If you had a great time, if you loved somebody in your group, or if you just think this whole experience is tremendous, what did you love? Kevin is happy to see all the shining faces. Isaac's group was great. Everybody's group was great. I should point out group one, the ratio of women to men, 4 women and 1 man, and then 2 men when I happened to join in there. So that was great.
Debatable.
Thanks, Yves. Appreciate that. All right. We're going to wrap this up, guys. Thank you very much. And people are not complaining about my backlighting. Yep. Sorry about that. These curtains, not mine. But anyway, there's Anita. Hi, Anita. Thanks, guys, for joining. We'll do this again. There are more calls coming this week. You're welcome to join those calls if you'd like. The Chinese call in particular usually has about 30 to 40 participants. It's very active. We usually end up with about 1 English-speaking group and then 4 to 5 Chinese primary-speaking groups. So you're welcome to join in there as well. And we'll look into
great conversations in that call. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
really good
get a really terrific perspective, especially during the summaries.
Absolutely. So thank you guys very much. And we'll see all your summaries hopefully soon. We love seeing those, and we'll provide some of our own. But please reach out if you'd like to help share with me or with the Alliance, as always. So thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for participating.
Bye.
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 Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.